How has engineering helped you as a CFO?
I actually think, I was a mechanical engineer and I designed Biosafety 4 labs. So these are labs that you see in movies like Contagion and Outbreak, where the scientists are wearing those rubber suits. And so I designed the systems that prevented infectious disease from getting into a water supply or from leaking out of the building into the air. And whether you're designing BSL-4 labs or a bridge or car motor, you're always learning as an engineer that you need to be looking for failures. So you're never designing something that will have a single point of failure, particularly when lives are at stake. And so you just sort of learn to look for the pitfalls. And it's not pessimism per se, but you learn to look for the pitfalls, to design around them, and to have not just a plan B, but a plan C for if something fails.
Hello and welcome back to the Pharmavers Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you're in the right place because we interview the brightest stars from all the corners of the pharma universe. And today's guest would certainly fit that description. Today, we're joined by Kelly Gold, the CFO at Camp4 Therapeutics. She's an engineer by training. She was a Wall Street banker and now a biotech CFO. And she's going to be discussing with us how competitive sports shaped her as a leader, why the industry has been in this prolonged trough, and a tip that you can implement into your leadership practice today. So now let's meet our guest, Kelly Gold. Welcome to the Pharmaverse. So as all of our viewers know, I'm a father of three girls. They all dance, ballet, and different things. So every weekend, every evening, I'm at the dance studio. And when I learned you were a dancer, I kind of see you growing up in that same environment. As a competitive dancer, how did that experience mold you as a leader?
I actually think dance is a perhaps unconventional background for leadership in biotech, but I think it served me very well. I think when you grew up in a dance studio and at the ballet bar, first you learn grit, you definitely learn perseverance, and it can be very demanding at certain levels. And so you really need to, learn how to persevere. And when you're performing live, frequently things don't go as intended, and so you also learn how to sort of roll with the unexpected, to make something that was unintended seem like it was intended. And so I think that growing up dancing, and particularly being so comfortable being in front of people, has really allowed me to sort of embrace the stage as a public company CFO.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because you have a baseball background.
Mhm.
It's sort of the same way, succeeding and failing in front of people, ad-libbing at times. All those are foundational experiences for leaders.
Absolutely. There's also performing through pain. I think people only see the beauty of ballet and dancing, but as you'll know, as a dad of dancers, there's a lot of pain underneath. And so, not that we want to think about leadership as painful, but it definitely sort of teaches you to push through even when times are hard.
That's a great point because sometimes you got to not let them know you're sweating underneath and that there is, anxiety or stress or anything. You want to stay cool as the leader.
That's right.
But I loved your point about ad-libbing
Hmm.
at times because we're in dance competition season right now.
Hmm. I know well.
Yeah. And there was this one performance recently where one of the props on her dress fell.
Hmm.
And it's there in the middle of the stage. And then she's doing her next pirouette or turn or whatever. She scoops it up,
Hmm.
spins, and throws it off as if it was like meant to be.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great metaphor for leadership. You're sort of picking up something that you didn't expect to pick up, and you're doing it to clear the way for other people. There's a great lesson there.
That's cool. And you grew up in Canada, right?
I did. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, so just above Montana.
All right. So no hockey?
Not for me, no. For a lot of the boys I knew, but no, I was definitely at the ballet bar.
Wow. Well, now that you're in the States, raising children in the States, do you see a big difference between growing up in Canada versus the United States?
Yes, well, I think it was probably the time I grew up as well. But I grew up in northern Canada. It was a very cold, snowy part of the country. We only had maybe 2 months of real summer in a year, and even then, it was very, not very chilly. And so, I think growing up in a climate like that, it kind of makes you tough. You kind of learn that you learn how to shovel snow at a young age, and you trek through it to get to school. And I know that's sort of something that people will joke about, but I actually did trek through knee-high snow to get to school. And I think that I grew up in a part of the country that was very it was a city but a little bit rural, and so you sort of had those values growing up as well, and sort of hard working kind of manual labor sort of community. And so now I think, certainly living in the United States has been a wonderful opportunity for me professionally. I think I have a wonderful background and foundation growing up in Canada and doing my undergraduate degree there. I came to the United States for graduate school and met my husband there. And, that's, what they say, be careful who you fall in love with, because they'll take you all over the world. And mine certainly has. So, no, we've been really happy raising our family in the United States. And there's certainly been evolution, during the time that I've lived here. It's been almost 20 years now. But I think there are a lot of similarities. I've met a number of people in the United States who are also extremely hardworking and motivated, and particularly in the biotech community. I think you'll find no more motivated and hardworking people than in that community in particular.
Yeah, agreed. And you talked about your foundation and some of your education. Most CFOs are accountants by training. You're an engineer.
Yes.
How has engineering helped you as a CFO?
I actually think, I was a mechanical engineer, and I designed Biosafety 4 labs. So these are labs that you see in movies like Contagion and Outbreak, where the scientists are wearing those rubber suits. And so I designed the systems that prevented infectious disease from getting into a water supply or from leaking out of the building into the air. And whether you're designing BSL-4 labs or a bridge or a car motor, you're always learning as an engineer that you need to be looking for failures. So you're never designing something that will have a single point of failure, particularly when lives are at stake. And so you just sort of learn to look for the pitfalls. And it's not pessimism per se, but you learn to look for the pitfalls, to design around them, and to have not just a plan B, but a plan C for if something fails. And I think that as a financial steward of a publicly traded company, that's a really important quality. I mean, certainly there's, a lot of room to be optimistic about the company's outlook and our financial outlook, but it's also my job to think about what if things go wrong, and, to always sort of have a plan for what I would do in that sort of scenario. So I think that I think engineers actually make great business leaders overall for that reason.
Yeah, we had another guest on that was an engineer that went into drug discovery. Mm-hmm. And he said a similar thing, that it's really foundational to like a thought process, more than anything. Yeah. But to be a dancer, they have that bodily kinesthetic, intelligence. To have an engineering background where you have this spatial intelligence, mm-hmm. and then be a CFO where you have to like work with numbers. That's a really dynamic background.
To me, they've always felt very, very interrelated. I think that, when you can sort of combine a nimble body and a nimble mind, if you will, and flexible thinking, I actually think that they all sort of come together in a really nice way.
There's a selfish question that I've been dying to ask you. So from your CFO perspective, mm-hmm. I'd love for you to try to explain why pharma has been sort of, I call it a trough, mm-hmm. Because it's been like this long, drawn out 40-month thing. Yeah. So why are we in it? Have we seen the worst of it? And are we on the upswing?
Yeah. Great questions. Look, from my perspective, this really sort of all kind of started in the pandemic. During the pandemic, there were a number of industries that really struggled, oil and gas, travel, retail, but there were industries that outperformed. And of course, healthcare and biotech in particular was one of those industries. And so I think you had this prolonged period of time during the pandemic that there was a flight of capital into healthcare, pharma, and biotech. And so that resulted in a really unprecedented amount of company generation and funding flowing into earlier stage companies that are just by definition riskier because they're earlier science, and the probability of success at that point in time are very low. And so I think you saw companies sort of getting off of the ground, getting funded that maybe in in a more conservative capital environment wouldn't have been being launched. And so then you had the sort of glut of earlier stage risky companies. A lot of capital had gone in, some from biotech specific investors, some from more generalists. And then what you started to see is science playing out over time. People had put substantial financial bets on companies that were early and had risk to their science, as we all do at that phase, and many of them failed. And so then you started to see a lot of investors, some of whom were not biotech investors and didn't maybe have the same kind of galvanization towards risk and failure that biotech focused investors do. And then I think you started to see people get very conservative about investing in our sector. There was sort of I'll say a correction in the opposite direction. That flight of capital was followed by a major pullback of capital, and certainly I would say we observed a level of risk tolerance that significantly decreased sort of post pandemic. And I think we've been kind of experiencing the aftermath of that period of time for, as you said, almost 4 years now. There was a real effect that happened. There was increases in valuations. It was very difficult to hire. Salaries became very inflated. And these are not things that correct in 12 months. These things take quite a bit of time to resolve. And so it seems like every year we all try to say, oh, there's some green shoots and we're coming out of it. It does feel like things have become a little bit more favorable this year. I think you're starting to see the market react more rationally to positive data that's being put out by biotech companies. We're seeing M&A happening, and that's usually a sign of a sort of healthier market, because that means we're going to see capital recycling through the investors who see upside from those acquisitions. And hopefully we're going to see a little bit more in the IPO market this year. I think for companies around our stage, that's what we really look to as the weather vane of how the markets are doing. Not just can a company go public, but is it going to trade well after it does? And so I don't know that we've seen a lot of data points there right now, but it does seem like things are slowly moving back up the hill.
I'm glad you said slowly moving back up the hill, because I do feel like it is trending there, but it's still stop and go traffic a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not like Autobahn like it was, post, 2021 or something,
That's true. And I think it's always important to think, what is baseline? Are we expecting to go back to 2021? Are we expecting to go back to sort of COVID level investment? I mean, I would argue that was sort of a peak, to your trough. And so that's maybe not where we should be getting back to as an industry. But I agree, we're not quite back to baseline yet.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I get asked that all the time. I just don't know what normal is going to be. Like, I don't know, like, is this normal, or are we still going towards normal? I don't know.
I think we're still going towards normal if we kind of exclude everything from 2020 onward, which has been a high followed by a prolonged low. I think we've not kind of found our homeostasis as a biotech industry, if you will.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I know you have a good perspective on this. Let's switch gears here, because I want to talk more about leadership, because your perspective there is really unique. Thinking about your leadership journey, how has leadership changed from your first leadership role until now?
Yeah, so I should say that I sort of grew up as a leader at Camp4. I've been with the company for almost 9 years. I joined shortly after inception. This is the longest I've worked anywhere in my career. So I've seen a lot. I started as a director of finance, and then I sort of worked my way up to eventually become the chief business officer, and then I became the chief financial officer in 2023. And so I think that when you first become a leader, you sort of think being a leader means having all the answers and everyone coming to you for everything. And you sort of, you kind of trick yourself into thinking that the busier you are, the better you are at your job by having your hand in everything. And I think what I've really learned, particularly since we went public in 2024, is that being a good leader actually does not mean being in everything. It means having a lot of great people around you who are subject matter experts, whom you can empower to, manage the things that need to be managed, and with whom you have a good relationship and strong communication, and sort of an understanding mutually of when you should be brought into something, and when someone can handle an issue on their own. And I think that's probably a lesson I'm still learning, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I think we all do as leaders. That's a tough one. I think CFOs have some of the most unique leadership challenges because you have to lead departments that you've never worked in, that you're not the functional expert, like legal, you're not the subject matter expert. What leadership muscles have you had to build to meet that challenge?
I think it's a really great point. And, I always say CFOs typically do a lot more than just financial oversight. And you're right, I oversee legal, I oversee IP, I oversee business development. And I think, one of the muscles you have to exercise is being able to tolerate discomfort. First of all, you're not going to know everything. And typically people of the phenotype that grow up to become CFOs, whether they're accountants or engineers or bankers, we are people that typically have had an answer, our entire career, and have known everything about whatever it is we're working on. And so I think when you have a very broad leadership role, you need to be comfortable not being a subject matter expert in everything you oversee. You also, though, need to keep that curiosity for learning. I think that, it can be tempting to sort of offload something completely. I think when I first started overseeing IP, that's probably a great example. When our CEO suggested that I oversee IP, I thought, well, I don't know the first thing about intellectual property. And that seems like maybe a bridge a little too far. And it was really just the opposite. I'd say, first of all, as I said before, have a great leader in that area that I can rely on and with whom I have a lot of trust. And that's, something I think is important as well. But I've also, sort of challenged myself to not become an IP expert, but certainly to understand the basics and, the sensitivities around things we may say publicly that could impact filings. And I think that really goes a long way. Also, when you're working with someone who's a subject matter expert, particularly in a very specific domain like intellectual property, I think it can go a long way in building that trusting relationship, which needs to really be established in order for your leader there to understand the value of bringing you in and also appreciate that you are really doing the work of understanding what it is they do and why it matters and how it impacts the company.
Yeah. So let's take it more granular. What is a practical leadership tip that our audiences can take with them today, implement today on their teams?
This one's going to sound a little bit, maybe a little pithy, but I have, and I'm trying to implement this myself. Actually, I'm trying to talk less. And by that, I mean, it can be tempting when you're in a leader in the room or the most senior person in a meeting. It can be tempting to feel like you need to do all the talking, sort of MC the meeting almost, if you will. And what I've found is if I talk less and leave it to my team or the other leaders in the room to talk more, I'm learning a lot from them, and the rest of the group is learning a lot, from the people who are, taking the floor. I think that, we've all been in meetings, I'm sure, where the CEO or some other C-suite leader is doing 90% of the talking, and we're not hearing anything that we didn't already know. And so I try to remind myself of that. Part of my role here is to listen to, what else is happening within my team, on the company, to understand, not just where I can help them, but let them have the conversations to work out real time how they can help each other. And I think that really strengthens that next level of leadership and, hopefully acts as an example of how they could one day operate when they're sitting at a C-level suite.
I'm going to play off that a little bit. So this is the way I'm visualizing this, because people are trained how to act in a meeting.
Yes.
So if your boss is in the meeting, you're looking to that person to do the talking. So did you have to train them, say, hey, look, this is your meeting, guys. You run it. I'm here, but I'm not, this is your meeting. Is that what you have to do?
Well, a little bit, but I think even more so. I mean, there's what we say, and then there's what we do. And I've definitely been in meetings with senior executives that will say this is your meeting. You guys run it. And then we'll proceed to talk for 75% of the meeting.
Guilty.
And so, while I say that, I think it's more important for me to, just sit and be quiet. And that was something I had to get comfortable with. I found it incredibly uncomfortable at the beginning to sort of kick off a meeting and then sit quietly waiting for someone to talk. And I'll admit the first few times there was some dead air. And as you'll well know from your own role, it's hard to sit with dead air. But eventually someone does talk, and they're typically, if you're the one breaking that kind of dead space, you're going to come up with something that you think is important, that you think other people in the room should be hearing. And so it's something I'm still practicing, absolutely. And there are still uncomfortable moments, but I find that the more space you give other people to just use their voices and share their ideas, the more impactful you can be as a leader and as a team.
I was guilty of this just yesterday. I mean, like late yesterday. We're in an intake call with a client, and the job is for the other recruiter. He asked me to be on the call, and I couldn't shut up.
Yeah, it's a very tempting thing to fill dead air, and I think professionally and personally, it's something I'm working on.
Yeah, same. But I know a lot of CFOs. It seems to be predominantly men. Is that true? Am I off by that? What is it like being a female CFO?
It's funny. I see the stats, the same ones you do. And yes, the majority of CFOs and C-suite executives are male. I guess I have a great network of women in those roles around me, because it doesn't seem visible to me. I feel like it's a lot of women, and certainly a lot of very accomplished women. I think in general, I'll be honest, coming from engineering and then working on Wall Street and then coming to corporate finance, I think corporate finance is more women than any room I've ever been in before. So I guess the perspective is always relative. But look, I think that, women are certainly rising through the ranks and taking these roles in particular. And I think, it's a great trend. I think that, the data is what it is, but it continues to evolve, I think, towards, parity. And I think that's great. But I'm certainly, as I said, given my background, I'm really not intimidated by taking a job that's predominantly held by men.
Yeah, it's really a great perspective. And as a dad of girls, I'm glad to see so many women rising up through the ranks, as you said. I think this is kind of ironic. Your husband's a CEO. You're a CFO. At my house, my wife is the CEO and the CFO. But in your house, are you the CFO there too?
I think I'm less of the CFO at our house, but I'm the everything else. I'm the COO, I'm the CEO, I'm the, as my mom would say, chief cook and bottle washer. There's sort of no thing that I'm not doing. But I think, in this day and age, there are many examples of dual professional homes. And I think it's all about figuring out the balance and really a division of labor that sort of makes it work with the family within the household. But yes, it is definitely a challenge.
I think a lot of female leaders are also wearing those two majorly big hats. Mm-hmm. And so it just makes the role of a female C-suite executive all the more amazing, because they have so much on their plate at home and at work. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to other female leaders?
Look, I think you articulated that really well. There's, significant demands on both sides of the ledger, professionally, personally. And I certainly don't want to diminish that male leaders experience that same tension. I think, some advice that I would give to women who want to sort of be in the C-suite one day is that there are going to be moments in time when it feels like the pull to be present more at home or with your family is there and in a stronger way. And I think that, it's important to understand that those are moments in time. They are important, and it's important that you pay attention to them. But it's a moment in time. It does pass. I have 3 kids that were all born in less than 4 years. So, there was certainly a period in my own career where things were extremely hectic, as you said, as CEO husband who traveled frequently. So you can imagine that I certainly went through that moment in time where I thought, gosh, is this sustainable? But I think if you sort of keep that North Star of knowing that you want to achieve more, and you can certainly get through those moments. And I would actually argue now that having gotten through the more difficult phases of balancing a career and family has emboldened me even more. It's hard when you're going through it, but on the other side, you think, well, if I was able to do that, what else can I do? And so I think that those really challenging moments can also, in a funny way, turn out to be your greatest motivators.
Interesting. You mentioned that Camp4 went public in 2024. How has that transition impacted your daily responsibilities as CFO?
Yeah, I would say that my CEO and I joke that we are the two people whose jobs completely changed when we went public. You get used to operating as a private company and interacting with investors in a certain way, and also in a very different cadence than you do when you're a publicly traded company. And so I think I would say that my job became a lot more outward facing. I would also say that actually the consideration of how we think about internal communication and partnering, within the company across all functions, also became that much more important. The way that you communicate internally also changes quite a bit once you're publicly traded, just to avoid contaminating people unnecessarily with material information. So I think that you end up spending a lot more time thinking about culture and how you maintain that during this very significant transition that I sort of liken to growing up. It's sort of like when you move out of your parents' house, that's a little bit what going public feels like. You're really operating on your own and having to figure some things out for the first time. I think, again, being surrounded by really good advisors and team members with experience at public companies has been a great resource for me and for my CEO as well. And it's truly been a great run so far in our public tenure.
That's great. Yeah, at our house, we call that adulting.
Yeah.
When you're, So we're all excited about what Camp4 is doing. What is the next big milestone for you guys?
Sure. So Camp4's next major milestone is going to be entering the clinic for our lead program, which is in SYNGAP1 related disorders. It's a rare genetic epilepsy. And I often say, when we say epilepsy, people imagine this is a seizure disorder, and seizures are certainly a hallmark of the disease, but it goes well beyond that for these patients. There's intellectual disability, motor issues, sleep problems. Many of them are nonverbal. There's a very strong developmental aspect to what we're working on, and we're really proud to be entering the clinic soon with this program, because there is nothing available for these patients on the market right now. So we're quite excited about that. Along with the entry into the clinic, we'll be unlocking a fairly substantial financial milestone from a financing that we did last year. And so that's sort of the next big thing to come. But Camp4 is very dedicated to working on other genetic epilepsies after SYNGAP1 related disorders. And so we'll be talking more about that in the near term as well.
That's great. And, we're rooting for you guys because these patients need something.
Absolutely.
And, Kelly, it's been so great to have you on. I've learned so much, especially about what you were talking about, like why we're in the situation that we're in. I think that is spot on. Kelly Gold is a great follow on LinkedIn. You can find more information about Camp4 at camp4tx.com. But Kelly, that's all the time we have for the show. But I want to thank you. Wonderful insights. And thank you for being a guest on the Pharmaverse.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that ends another episode of the Pharmavers Podcast, and we have many great leaders lined up for you, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss a single career-enhancing insight. But for now, that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse.